Welcome back after a very short break to the next session, Tipping Point, Permafrost, Fires in Siberia and the Arctic. Can large herbivores stop the thawing process? It almost sounds like the work of a science fiction author, a bit like Jurassic Park, only without dinosaurs. Two scientists want to bring back the landscape of the last ice age back to life. In the Pleistocene Park in northeastern Siberia, they have settled Yakut horses, reindeer, elk and bison in an area of about 144 square kilometers, which they hope will transform the tundra back into a vast grassland, just as it was thousands of years ago across large parts of the northern hemisphere. But their idea is not as crazy as it sounds. They are not novelists, but Arctic experts. Their project is scientifically sound and based on decades of research and tangible investigations. And the whole thing has one important goal: to prevent the permafrost from thawing. This would release large amounts of methane, a gas that is harmful to the climate, a self-reinforcing process that would heat up our planet even more. The Russian ecologist Sergei Simov founded Pleistocene Park more than 25 years ago, and I am very pleased to be able to talk to his son now, Nikita Simov, here at Zeit für Klima, about this gigantic climate protection project. He has now taken over from his father and manages the park. Welcome, Mr. Simov. It's very nice to have you here.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And I hope you enjoy this half an hour.
I hope so too. And so this leads me to a very warm welcome to you, dear viewers, at home on your screens. Please participate in this discussion. I invite you to actively ask questions via the platform Slido. Again, you know this from sessions before. And I will try to include the questions at the appropriate point. Feel also free to use and join us on social media. The hashtag for the event is Zeit für Klima. Yes, Mr. Simov, you're sitting in front of a wonderful screen, but I know that it is roughly 10 p.m. now in Siberia, and you told me before you're in Novosibirsk in Siberia. It's quite dark, but, well, maybe you take us with you on a little journey, what it looks like when you're during daylight in Pleistocene Park. What do we see there?
Well, if you talk about right now it's already winter out there. I think temperatures are around -20 centigrade, and the winter is more or less at full strength, and we are approaching polar night. So I think in about a month from now, there will be no daylight at all, and it's going to be dark most of the days. What you would see in the Pleistocene Park, you would see our work on transformation from one ecosystem types to another. So right now, in most of the Arctic, a majority of the ecosystems you would see there are very low productive ecosystems, which are dominated by small moss, lichen, some evergreen shrubs, some large forest. And what we want to do, we want to return it to the conditions how it was just 15, 20,000 years ago. And at that time, out there everywhere, there were millions of animals. So the density and variety of animals was similar to what you would now be able to see in the wildlife, I think only in the Serengeti and other national parks in Africa. And that was the Arctic like that. And that's what we want to return. So for this, we are bringing animals to the Arctic, and we are helping them to adapt, and we let animals through grazing have effect on the vegetation. So it's not only climate influences vegetation, it's animals who actually transforming and creating the pastures for themselves.
So what are elk, bison or goats supposed to do about climate change?
That's a kind of good question. So first of all, they need to create an ecosystem where they will be able to live. And this ecosystem, we already have effect on the climate. And there is four parameters why we say this ecosystem will be good for the climate. So first, as you already mentioned, we have problem with the permafrost. Permafrost is a huge carbon reservoir, and permafrost is extremely vulnerable to the climate change. Climate change is 2 to 3 times stronger in the Arctic compared with the rest of the world. And temperature of permafrost is increasing. And we need to protect permafrost somehow. And with this ecosystem, we can actually do that. One of the reasons why permafrost is relatively warm, it's substantially warmer, like 5 degrees warmer than the annual average air temperature in the region. And the reason for that is that in the winter, we have a snow cover, which does not allow soils to freeze deeply in the winter. And if you would be able to remove the snow, you would cool the temperature by 5 degrees. And the question is, how can you actually get rid of the snow? And here, that's where the animals might actually help. If you will have a good pastures, you will have something tasty underneath the snow, the animals will come to this place in the winter, they will dig through the snow, trample it down, and that snow will lose most of its heat insulating abilities. And the ground and permafrost underneath will cool much deeper. And I think we can realistically get maybe 2 to 3 degrees cooling of the permafrost on the pastures.
And your father, he started the project in the 1980s, so quite a long time ago, but even longer ago was his research work where he came up with this idea. What made him do this in the first place? So what motivated him? What did he find that actually convinced him that this is a good way of protecting the climate and actually convert the tundra back into another ecosystem?
Well, I think at that time, the problem of climate change wasn't really there still. So it was first ideas came in the 80s. And at that time, I think the world was mostly afraid that the global cooling is going to happen very soon, that we are going to go to the ice age. And I think there was a combination of two things. First, he was in the Arctic and he moved to the Arctic to do research, and he hoped to see rich and wild ecosystem. And when he arrived, he figured out that there is very few animals. The wildlife and nature is not very friendly to people, and the only creatures living in this ecosystem in abundance are mosquitoes. And also, he saw that everywhere where there was this permafrost exposing, for example, at a lake where the lake or the river was eroding permafrost, you would be able to find enormous amounts of bones. So these prehistoric animals like mammoths, bison, horses, the animals you wouldn't be able to see in the Arctic right now, we were at that time at huge numbers. And also, he saw that anywhere, if there is a disturbance in the wildlife, if there is a fire, if there is maybe a trail or crawling transporter moved, or people living, or animals are grazing, everywhere grasses will start to appear instead of modern vegetation. And these two conclusions led to him to thinking that animals, through grazing and through this disturbance, can actually cause grasses to be a dominant vegetation and allow to establish these high productive grazing ecosystems. So that's how the idea. So the idea was not about climate change originally. It kind of came later, but it was about restoring the nature to original state.
And so what was so special about the Pleistocene? Why, of all things, do you want to emulate especially this era?
Well, I don't like dinosaurs, so I don't want to recover Jurassic Park. It's not feasible. Second, so apart from restoring permafrost, these ecosystems were probably far more rich than any other modern ecosystem. So that might be beneficial for us, just even in terms of economy. If you have millions and millions of animals of, let's say, sustainable meat production, that's already something. But for us, that's a goal. It's about climate, really, now. And it's we show that apart from restoring, keeping permafrost intact, there is also several other activities. So one of them, and not activities, but ecological phenomena, why these ecosystems are good. And one of that is that in the modern ecosystems, when you come to the Arctic, you will see that majority of vegetation is very low productive. It doesn't grow very fast, so it doesn't need lots of water. And if it doesn't need lots of water, it doesn't need lots of roots. And in modern soils in the Arctic, all the carbon is located somewhere in the top 20, maybe 15 or 10 centimeters of the ground. And if you, instead of that, will have grass and herbs, which grow very rapidly, they will they need lots of water and they need lots of roots, and they will grow roots very deep to look for water, to search for water. And what is a root? That's organic matter, which was converted from CO2 to greenhouse gas, which was picked up from the atmosphere and dig down to the ground. And the ground is very cold, and decomposition there is very slow. And in the Arctic, for example, if you want to have a nature-based solutions to climate change and sequester greenhouse gases, it doesn't make much sense to plant trees. It's very cold, and trees are tiny and sparse, and they grow for a very long time. So you cannot sequester much. Plus, those forest fires, which you mentioned, they are coming more and more frequently. And all the carbon which you would be able to store in the forest would disappear. And at the same time, the soils are cold, and you can store up to 50 times more carbon in the soil versus what you could store in the trees. So grazing ecosystems, it's a sustainable, a long-term sink of greenhouse gases. And the Arctic is big, and if you convert even a relatively small portion of the Arctic into the high productive grazing ecosystems, we can sequester quite a lot of carbon.
When I'm well informed, I hope I did my research well, you studied something totally different. You studied math and computer modeling. How did your father manage to get you so excited about his ambitions that you're involved today too?
Well, I was brought to the Arctic when I was 2 years old. So it was even before my dad started first experiments with the Pleistocene Park. It was, 1985. And I grew up all my childhood there on the research station in the Arctic, and I really enjoyed the place. Then, since it's a remote town, I had to go to university somewhere, to go to high school and the university to get education. And, it was just like the life turned this way that ended up in mathematical department. So it wasn't exactly maybe my desire, but series of consequences led me there. And then when I was studying, I think my dad said, "Well, son, when after you're done in university, why don't you want to come back to the Arctic and work at the research station and do science with me?" And since I liked the place and I thought that what my dad is doing in terms of science and in terms of Pleistocene Park does have a potential, I agreed, and that's how I ended up back in the Arctic.
One aim of the project, we talked about that earlier, is to preserve the permafrost and actively contribute to climate protection. Is there already evidence that the project is working? So can you say it is successful, or are you still at the very beginning?
We do have some measurements showing that, for example, we have more carbon in the park soils compared with soils outside of the park. We do have measurements showing that our ecosystem is lighter, just color-wise, comparing with the forests outside of the Pleistocene Park. So, and the lighter the surface, the more energy it reflects back to space. So the grazing ecosystems have a direct cooling on the climate. Even apart from greenhouse gases, the lighter the surface, the colder the climate. So that's also thing we could see. Some parameters, for example, like protecting permafrost, is still ongoing because we need to have fully working ecosystem. We need to have pastures even better than what we have right now. So we are on the positive trend, but it takes time. And in terms of proving the science, I think we're making a good progress. In terms of receiving experience and expanding our small park, I think we are doing quite good. If you will be talking that how far are we from from creating the ecosystem, which will be big enough to influence global climate, of course, we are very far from that. For that, we would need millions of animals and huge territories, and it will take lots of time. But I am sure that the goal worth trying, and so we are working this way.
Yeah, well, I said the whole park is just about 144 square kilometers, so it is big, but in terms of the global climate, it's quite small. And you will probably be asked this over and over again, but how many animals do live at the moment in the Pleistocene Park, and how many are needed to cause a real change?
Oh, well, I think right now we have about 150 animals in the Pleistocene Park, and those are small populations, mostly which we brought in the last 4 years. So we actually started to work more actively on the Pleistocene Park, and we start to get extra resources for the park just in the last 4 years. And for now, our job is to create adapted populations of those animals in the Pleistocene Park. Our job is to see which animals do what niche, ecological niche they take, how well they impact the vegetation, where and how they behave. So it's a scientific goal. We need to discover and learn. 144 square kilometers is indeed a relatively small area, but at the same time, on this, let's say, polygon, we need to test and see how it's easiest and cheapest to restore those ecosystems. And then we'll be able to prove the concept and show the economical part of that, how much would it cost us to create those ecosystems, what profits we will have, and then we'll be able already to expand. Because as long as you're just, let's say, as you said, let's say crazy Russian scientists in the middle of nowhere doing some crazy things, no one would want to follow you. But you need to gather enough evidence that what you do really makes sense and it's valid, and you need to have enough science and just enough practical. You need to be able to show people herds of animals which are increasing in numbers and expanding, and then people will trust. So that's what we are doing.
And you're referring to that probably, that there are scientists who say your dad did a lot of things just because, like there was no real controlled experiment, but he just did it because he thought it was right. So it was more like test and try. And now you have quite a big network of scientists all over the world from different universities who come to your place and do experiments. So how did you actually develop this network with so many scientists helping you to actually show that the experiment is working?
Well, first of all, we always had many scientists coming to the research station. So Pleistocene Park, it's one of the projects which is conducted on the Northeast Scientific Station. That's a research station which we run and own in the Arctic. And it's always attracted many scientists. Not all of them been involved in the park. Some of them been doing some hydrology, permafrost studies, soil studies, atmospheric, carbon circulation, many other research. So we managed to have a community of people who've been working in the park and whom we know. Some of those people got interested in the Pleistocene Park. Some of them never been on the station but knew about the park and decided to come and do research. And for example, we now have at least a couple big research grants operating and having monitoring programs in the Pleistocene Park. 3 days ago, there was approval with a team of professors from Oxford, and we will start more measurements in the Pleistocene Park. And that's kind of, it's so process. You build up a community, you get people to trust you. And maybe, let's say, I never had maybe enough evidences that the park worked, but I had some, and some of that convinced some people. We collected a little bit more data, convinced more people. And I think that's kind of like a snowball. It's very hard to start. But after you get going with the park, it's actually, I see that now every year, it's getting easier. We are getting more skilled at creating a park. So that's, we understand the complexity. We maybe are not that kind of naive as we've been 20 years ago. And also it's a work which, the more people think that that's kind of what you're doing is important, the easier it is for you. The more people it's getting to support you. And now I think Pleistocene Park is actually on quite a good trend. And I hope you'll be able to, in the next 20 years, I really hope you will develop much faster than we did in the last 20 years.
And how do you cope with disappointment? So I read a story when you brought a couple of, I think it was elks to the Pleistocene Park, and none of them survived very long. So how does it feel when you do something for such a long time, especially your father, and you always see that it's such hard work and so many, as I said, disappointments, and you keep going?
Yeah, that was actually quite. It was extremely, the most complicated extreme expedition in my life was actually to bring those elks. It was 25 days in travel through this melting ice roads, and it was extremely risky and tiring. And yes, I think half of the group of elks did not live through the first winter, and the other half escaped next year since we had fences to shore. But it's always been hard with the park. So it's never came easy. There is always something going on. We don't have a knowledge. No one has a knowledge how to restore ecosystems well. No one did restore ecosystems entirely. Some people just bring some animals and see how one species is adapting to the new place. We are having this kind of complex approach, and we don't know how exactly to do it. We know that those ecosystems existed, and we know that these ecosystems will be able to live now, and we have all the proofs for that. And I am sure that what I'm doing will be good for the nature, will be good for the humans. And I think that's kind of the answer to your question, how I deal with difficulties and failures. I don't lose faith that what I'm doing is meaningful. And that's kind of what helped me to continue kind of standing up and continue doing what we're doing.
And restoring a whole ecosystem is an action which is human-made again. So first we destroyed it, and now we're restoring it. So when we're talking about this area, then there's a fence around it. So of course it's a huge area, and the animals can run around freely. But in the end, there's a fence. So how do you kind of try to give them an ecosystem which is not like a zoo or something where you walk through and you see those animals living in a certain area, but you actually have an ecosystem that is natural?
Well, let's say I need to get this ecosystem going. I don't know exactly how it will be shaped. So I brought, let's say, in the park, not in the park, in the place in time, in this ecosystem, there were main 4 creatures, herbivores: mammoths, bison, horses, reindeer, much less woolly rhinoceros, and I think just occasionally muskox. Right now, we already have more than 10 different species of animals in the Pleistocene park, and probably not all of them will be able to live in the wild ecosystem. So right now, those animals are used, let's say, as a tool to convert from one vegetation to another vegetation. And of course, there is nothing natural. It's kind of many of the things which we do are very close to what farms do. And at the same time, we hope to get this kind of this body of this kind of ecosystem start function on their own. And for that, we need not only herbivores, we need predators. And I hope to develop park. And it's not only developing the park just within its territory. We need to develop the concept. We need to prove people what the wild ecosystem, how rich the wild nature can be, how profitable it is. And we need to get this to broad territory. We need to get it to the government, to the business. And ideally, I would want to end up working in the park as soon as possible. I would hope that by the time I retire, I will come to the Pleistocene park, I will break the fence, open the fence, and let this ecosystem go on their own. And I want this ecosystem to be able to expand on their own without the help of animals. So that's kind of the help of humans. And that's kind of ultimate goal of ours. So yes, I want to have a wild ecosystem. I don't know exactly how it will be created. Well, it's created. We are working on that. So it's not very natural, of course. But I hope that in the future, it will kind of evolve the way the nature would want it to evolve.
So how do you ensure that a natural cycle, like a real self-sustaining ecosystem, develops? If one population gets out of hand, everything gets out of balance, and you have to intervene again from the outside. So how do you actually try to get this whole thing going without having to intervene?
Well, let's say we need to get as much biodiversity as possible. The more diverse biodiversity, the better. We ideally need to expand as much as possible because, for example, if there's somewhere an extreme weather event in one place, we need to have animals to be able to migrate to the place where the conditions are better. And how would I assure? No, I have no idea how I can ensure that. I just know that naturally those ecosystems exist. I know that we have, let's say, majority of animals which lived on this ecosystem are still alive. So we still have bison, we still have horses, we still have reindeer. We don't have mammoths, but apparently we might get some mammoths in a decade or two from now. So we may have a complete ecosystem there. We have wolves of the predators, and we have big cats, we have Amur tigers, we have lions, which after adaptation will be able to live in the Arctic. Even though it may sound kind of surprising, but I think what I heard that the, let's say, cave lion which lived in our ecosystem in our region 20,000 years ago has identical genome to African lion. So we call it African because it survived only in Africa. But I think 20,000 years ago, this cat lived everywhere on the planet. So we'll see.
You said something which is often brought together with your Pleistocene Park, the bring back to life of the mammoth, and one can see it in your background. So would it be the best thing if scientists at some other place, not you, but geneticists bring back the old mammoth and bring it to the Pleistocene Park? What will happen then?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's kind of will be the best thing, but I'm sure that, well, we know that in any wild ecosystem, any wild grazing ecosystem which exists now or did exist in the past, always existed, was a niche for the big elephant. So in Africa, that's African lion, there is Asian lion, here in the Arctic was mammoth. In North America, there was even 3 types of mammoths or elephants living simultaneously. And if so, then there is clearly a niche in the grazing ecosystems for big elephants. I cannot say you exactly what was that niche, but if that was so, there must be. I could argue that with mammoth, our ecosystem would be much more aggressive in terms that pasture ecosystems are fighting with shrubland ecosystem, with these forest ecosystems, and if we would have mammoths, we would be able to invade into other ecosystems much faster, because mammoths, and same as elephants, are just like to knock down trees, and they do that because they are creating the pastures for themselves. So that's kind of in their genome code to fight with trees, and that's kind of the way in which they function. So here, I think that will be beneficial. So, and I think just overall, I don't have any ethical issues with restoring and creating animals which died many years ago. Well, I said I don't like dinosaurs, so I would be opposed to having dinosaurs walking alive. But it's just me. I just hate dinosaurs. Maybe someone like them and would argue with me, but it's a matter of taste. But with mammoths, I think it would be really cool to have mammoths in the Pleistocene Park, and beneficial ecological wise. And even there is even one point that there is a big concern about methane emissions from animals and ruminants, and many people are asking me about, well, you're trying to create an ecosystem with many cows, and how are we going to deal with methane emissions? And here I would say, well, first of all, with high productive ecosystem, we will have much drier soils and we'll have much less water saturated bodies. So that's why we will have much less methane. And here this will bounce back the ruminant effect. And that also, if we'll have majority of animals in the ecosystem, horses and mammoths, they produce much less methane than cows or bulls or bison. So in this sense, mammoths are better for the climate than the bison, because they produce much less methane.
And of course, mammoths are like a marketing factor, because in the end, you need to raise money for your project, because well, every animal that comes to the Pleistocene Park costs a lot, and yeah. So how do you say this? Like, is it also something you promote, because then people look at your project and think, oh wow, that's cool?
Let's say it wasn't me who stated that. But yes, of course, we are trying to get, let's say, I'm trying to get as much positive attention from mammoths, and ideally as minimum negative reactions, because many people don't like the idea of mammoth cloning. And as soon as I hear the negative reaction, I'm like, come on. I'm not cloning the mammoths. I'm just bringing horses and bison back to the nature. Just leave me alone. I'm not doing anything unnatural, which I really don't. However, even though I do wish those guys who do those unnatural things all the best luck. And yes, it's sad. I really like woolly rhinoceros. They also huge animals which also went extinct, but no one care about them, and majority of people didn't even know such animals did live, and that's actually a big shame. So, of course, mammoths are this kind of, they are media celebrity. They're the biggest extinct celebrities, and that's why kind of we, of course, as a it's a sort of icon, and we use it in all of our logos everywhere. So that's true. We need to promote. It's not very cheap indeed to maintain the place in park. All the animal transportations are super expensive, super long, super complicated, and we are of course always looking for resources and extra money and funding to get to do and expand as fast as we can. So we use Mamos as marketing indeed.
So we're all very curious if your project actually works out, if you can really see a transformation process. Well, the time is nearly over. I have to thank you very much for this interview about a very unusual climate protection project in northern Russia. Thank you, Nikita Tsimov, that you have been here even at this late time of the day in Russia. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Good luck.
Thank you very much.